Hello everybody, I was gonna make this video quite a while ago, but the problem was I got derailed slightly. See, what happened was at the beginning of November, I picked up 2 boxes full of PC, motherboard, sound cards, network cards, graphics cards, that came from a scrapper, I believe, for 55 euros each. However, upon arrival there, I noticed that my number plates on the car were missing, and that's obviously not good. So, my plan to make an exhaustive video about it and also look at a few more things in detail got derailed slightly by me having to deal with that problem. I had to get the car re-registered, I had to get a new license plate, I had to mount a new license plate, I had to renew my parking permit and go over to the registration bureau and had to change all the stuff there and then get a new environment sticker and everything like that. It was really messy. And stick around to the end of the video if you want to hear more raging about it. So what ended up happening instead was I got together with my friends on the RetroWeb into the Discord channel and I unboxed the stuff there, showed them a little bit of what I had, sorted out all the obvious scrap that I was just gonna salvage components off of and then throw back into the scrap. A lot of that stuff wasn't recorded. In fact, I don't even have pictures of the original boxes. However, what you see here is an excerpt from that Discord session where I just showed, after I already curated the stuff, what was left over, which was quite a lot. And frankly, for $100, that was a pretty good chance that it was gonna be worth it. So this is just the first video in a series where I'm just gonna show off some highlights. So Happy New Year and enjoy the show. The first exhibit was a Shuttle AE23. This is a Socket 370 motherboard with the Intel 815 EP chipset. It's got AJP4X and 3 RAM slots. I'm not a particularly big fan of the 815 chipset simply because it's artificially limited to 512 megabytes of RAM. 2001, that was a daring decision. My guess is that Intel wanted to push people towards the Pentium 4 that was being released at that time. So at first the power on self-test hung at 26, which is VGA initialization. And then I put in another graphics card, and then it didn't. And then it posted. Aha! This particular variant seems to have an OEM BIOS from Tulip Computers. I'm hearing a rapid beep tone here, and the keyboard doesn't work.
Why is it beeping at me? It's beeping like mad.
This probably means that the board thinks the key is being pressed all the time.
From that right there.
The problem was quickly determined. There's a ferrite bead right here through which the voltage is being supplied to the keyboard port. And that one was intermittent. If I pressed on it, the voltage came back. It wasn't a cold solder joint, as I had first assumed.
Quoi le fuck?
It was simply a micro crack inside there. In fact, desoldering it simply fell apart. Fixing this is relatively simple. Just steal one from another donor board and you're done.
That is so neat. Let's find out. Ba, 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 ba.
The keyboard worked fine and the rest of the board appeared intact too. Ran speedsys in the QuakeTime demo and then entered the board as working in my database. The next board was an MSI MS7380, which is more commonly known as a PA7N SLI Platinum. The thing is, here there are some IOs missing, and this board is red and not black. That is because it's not the publicly sold variant. This one is an OEM motherboard sold by Packard Bell, because apparently they had some kind of gaming desktop lineup at the time. 2 issues with this board and the same root cause. This board was handled by scrappers and they like to salvage the heatsinks. This board has pretty steep cooling requirements because of the chipset. It gets really warm, needs some heat pipe cooling. And then the socket was also really mangled because, well, it went to the scrap, boards fell on top of it. These LGA sockets aren't protected. It's a common problem with all LGA boards that go into the scrap. It's really hard to salvage these. Nevertheless, I wanted to see if it posed, so armed with an X-Acto knife and lots of patience, I got to work. Now, as a makeshift solution, I just plopped some random heatsinks there.
Let's go!
And to my surprise, first try the board actually came up fine.
No way, man! Thanks. That is cool.
What's cool about this BIOS is that the color cycle on top is cyan. I'm particularly fond of this color. I don't know, it's just a bit nicer compared to the regular BIOSes which only do dark blue to light blue. I couldn't leave it on for long though, because the North Bridge was already getting very hot. I'm keeping this board around, maybe someday I'll get some proper heat pipe cooling, who knows. Now here's an interesting one, another LGA 775 board, this time with a P35 chipset. This is a Gigabyte GA-P35 DS3R. But first things first, of course, scraperitis, mangled socket pins. So I did a rudimentary test setup with a random CPU and a PCI graphics card, but the board would do something very strange. It would show some nonsensical postcodes on the postcard, and after a second, just power cycle, turn itself off, and then back on again a moment later.
I think it's... Does this thing have a Gigabyte dual BIOS?
Yes, it does. It does. It's 2 BIOS chips.
These increasing postcodes is basically a junk BIOS. Like, it's coming up with garbage.
Now that was Rigo's assessment of the situation, and I'm inclined to agree, because the postcodes don't match anything I know from AMI, Award or Phoenix BIOS. To my understanding, the way this works is there's a watchdog with a register that the BIOS writes to in case it starts up properly. If the register isn't written to within a second or so, the watchdog bites and power cycles the system. And in doing so, it selects the other BIOS chip than the one that was active. Now the fact that we're getting postcodes, albeit nonsensical ones, does mean that the CPU is running code. And therefore I have to assume that the rest of the system is probably functional. The only logical thing to do, therefore, is to remove the BIOS chip and check what's actually on it. It's a surface mount chip, so I had to use hot air to remove it, and then in order to do anything with it, I had to first solder it onto an adapter PCB. I put the chip with the adapter PCB in the Galeb, read out the contents, and then used my local copy of the RetroWeb BIOS analysis bot to see if this BIOS is intact. Now here's the problem. As you can see, these text fields are all blank. Normally that would say the vendor of the BIOS like AMI or Award or Phoenix, as well as sign-on strings and other information about the BIOS. Either the bot does not support this type of BIOS yet, highly unlikely considering it's such a common board, or, the more likely scenario, the BIOS is corrupted and cannot be recognized. Just to make sure of that, I downloaded the latest BIOS from the Gigabyte website and ran it through the bot. And indeed, the strings are properly displayed. So all I had to do now to correct this error was erase the chip and flash it with the proper BIOS. And of course soldering the chip back on, which thankfully wasn't that hard because of the long pads that they give you. But we're not over the hill yet. It says that the backup BIOS is corrupted. Then it reflashes it and I was really scared. But it actually worked fine. And the board came up properly and everything was well after that. I must say I really admire Rigo here because his gut feeling was as usual totally correct. And that's really one of the main differences between someone more experienced like him and me. I would have probably arrived at the same conclusion and been able to do the same repair, but it would have taken me a lot more trial and error to get there. But thankfully I surrounded myself with people much smarter than me, so there's that. Anyway, enough of that. That's it for the first part of this video series. I don't know how many parts it will be, maybe 1 or 2 more. There's definitely some more interesting stuff coming up. Actually, I was going to tell you a bit more about legal trouble and police and whatnot. So in case you want to hear about that, keep listening. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye. Environment sticker and everything like that. It was really messy. Not to mention me having to deal with the police on scene in the first place. Like where I picked it up, I actually had to go to the police there, not drive home first, because obviously I didn't want to get stopped by police. If they're going to notice that your number plates are missing, they're going to stop you and ask a few questions. And well, the question I asked myself is, why did they do this? And the police officer gave me an interesting answer. They didn't really know, because usually the kind of people who use this to cover criminal activities, to like a stolen car and use a different number plate on it, they would target cars that other people would actually have. Either that, or they would target cars that are more valuable. I drive a really basic car, and it's a special edition of that car, so unless they had this specific version of the car, they wouldn't be able to cover up shit. Yeah, they would realize that the number plate's off. And then I asked myself, why me? Because this is the second thing that happened to my car this year, or last year rather. Because earlier that year, I got my mirrors kicked in. And let me tell you, I used to be a huge friend of the police, because it's a popular German saying, my friend and helper, yeah? And what happened there made me really furious, because there was a witness to the crime. The witness could describe the criminal, and he also saw that the criminal was running towards the train station. I live very close to the train station, so that's only natural. So the witness and his girlfriend went to the train station police, and asked them to help look for a criminal who fit that description. And the police there said, this is none of our business, none of our concern, call the regular police and they'll sort it out. Like, what do you want him to do? The guy's gonna get on a train, get out of there, that's only natural. And when the witness told me this, when we were dealing with the police, I almost lost my shit. Because what the hell is the point of train station police if not for things like this? The criminal was obviously gonna head on a train and get out of town. Anyway, that's enough waffling.